I never expected a simple cup of coffee to almost cost me my life. My name is Rose, I'm 64 years old, and I live with my son and daughter-in-law in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Ohio. Most mornings are routine. I wake early, sip my coffee, and check my emails before the day begins. But this morning, something was different. From the moment I stepped into the kitchen, there was a strange weight in the air, a heaviness I couldn't explain. I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about family drama, emotional courage, and the unexpected turns life throws our way. The day began like any other, or so I thought. I shuffled into the kitchen, still rubbing sleep from my eyes, and noticed the newspaper lying unopened on the counter. My cat, whiskers brushed against my legs, purring softly as if sensing my unease. I paused, fingers hovering over the paper, and for a brief second, I felt the tiny prick of premonition. Something was off. My daughter-in-law, Claire, appeared from the hallway carrying a steaming cup of coffee. She smiled, that polite, practiced smile I had seen countless times, yet today it felt slightly strained. "Good morning, Mom," she said softly, setting the cup in front of me. "I made your favorite. Half cream, no sugar." Her voice was gentle, almost tender, but there was something in her eyes that made me hesitate, a fleeting shadow of hesitation I couldn't place. I took the cup in my hands, feeling the warmth seep into my palms. I wanted to trust her. I really did. After all, she's my son's wife, and in many ways, she's been kind. Yet, something about her manner seemed different this morning, like she was hiding something behind her practiced politeness. I sipped slowly, letting the steam rise to my face. The aroma was familiar, comforting, and yet faintly bitter. My brow furrowed. Could my imagination be playing tricks on me? Before I could dwell on it, the maid, Marlene, appeared in the doorway. Marlene had been with us for nearly a year. She's a soft-spoken woman, in her mid-40s, with an uncanny ability to notice things most people miss. She stopped mid-step, her eyes widening as she glanced at the coffee cup in my hands. "Rose, wait," she said, her voice trembling just enough to catch my attention. "Don't drink that." I laughed nervously. "Marlene, it's just coffee. What could possibly be wrong with it?" Her face was pale. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. I think Claire put something in it. Something that could hurt you." The words hit me like a bucket of ice water. My grip on the cup faltered. I had seen betrayal in stories, in movies, and even read about it in newspapers, but I had never thought I would face it in my own home from someone so close. My mind raced. Could she really have intended to harm me? My hands shook slightly, and I set the cup down on the counter with more force than I intended. Claire's smile didn't falter. She continued to hum softly, pretending everything was normal, while my heart pounded in my chest. I felt a mixture of disbelief, fear, and a strange sense of betrayal. How could my own daughter-in-law even consider doing something like this? I remembered the arguments my son and Claire had recently had about the office meeting I was supposed to attend. The documents I was going to sign today could shift power and finances in ways that clearly mattered to her. Could this really have been her way of forcing me out of the way? Marlene didn't wait for an answer. She grabbed a clean towel and carefully wiped up the coffee that had spilled slightly as I put the cup down. I saw her. Last night, she left a little packet on the counter. I didn't touch it, but I recognized the taste from when my sister was poisoned years ago. It wasn't coffee flavor. Her words were low, urgent, but calm. Calm enough to make me listen. I sank into a chair, my hands clutching the edge of the table. My thoughts were spinning. Every small action of Claire flashed through my mind, her little nudges, insistence on helping with my medications, her constant presence in my office space last week. Had I missed all the signs? I wanted to shout, to confront her immediately, but I also knew that without proof, it would be just my word against hers. And in a house filled with polite smiles and subtle manipulations, that could backfire in ways I couldn't imagine. The kitchen felt unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that presses in on you, making each tick of the clock louder than it should be. Whiskers jumped onto the counter, nudging my arm, sensing the tension. I ran my fingers through my hair, trying to think clearly. The meeting today was important. My vote would influence the company's budget decisions, and I couldn't afford to be distracted, or worse, incapacitated. And yet, I realized that had Marlene not been here, I would have taken that first sip, and there was no telling what might have happened. I stood and moved toward the window, letting the morning sun hit my face. The familiar sight of our small garden did little to calm me. Roses in full bloom reminded me ironically of my own name, and yet the symbolism felt bitter today. Betrayal is never obvious at first glance. It grows quietly, like weeds in a garden you thought was safe. My mind wandered to my son, Mark. He's always been a good man, kind and trusting. How would he react if he knew what Claire was capable of? Could I confront her without destroying the family? I tried to steady my breathing, realizing that my pulse was racing faster than it should. Marlene noticed and quietly guided me back to the counter. Sit, Rose. Just sit. Don't move too fast. Let's think this through. Her calmness was a lifeline in a morning that had suddenly spiraled out of control. I nodded, still shaking, as I sank onto a stool. The cup sat there, abandoned, a silent reminder of how close I had come to disaster. Claire, meanwhile, cleared her throat softly, pretending to tidy up the dishes. "Are you okay, Mom? You look a little pale." Her concern sounded rehearsed, the kind of concern you give when you know someone has been caught in an unexpected way. My stomach twisted. Every gesture, every word she said suddenly seemed loaded with hidden meaning. The polite domesticity of our kitchen felt like a stage, and I had just discovered that the performance might hide lethal intentions. I recalled small details from the past week. Claire insisting on bringing my morning coffee every day, subtly reminding me how her work schedule allowed her to help me, nudging me closer to signing papers that favored her position at the company. Each detail, in retrospect, felt like a deliberate pattern. My heart sank. How many moments had I overlooked, chalking them up to kindness or habit? Marlene's hand on my shoulder snapped me back to the present. "Rose, you did the right thing. You stopped in time. Don't let panic cloud you. Observe, gather proof, and stay safe." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. I realized that survival this morning wasn't just about avoiding the coffee. It was about understanding the motives, the power plays, and the subtle betrayals that had been unfolding quietly under my nose. I glanced at Claire again. She was smiling now, perfectly composed, unaware, or pretending not to know, the silent victory Marlene had secured for me. I felt a strange mixture of anger, fear, and relief. Anger at the audacity of the act, fear at how close I had come to catastrophe, and relief that someone had intervened in time. As I moved to get dressed for the meeting, my hands still trembled slightly. Each movement, even as mundane as putting on a blouse or brushing my hair, was charged with the awareness that nothing in my day would be ordinary again. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. An older woman, but one who had just survived a silent, almost invisible attack. I paused, my reflection staring back at me. This morning had changed everything. The routine of breakfast, the familiar comfort of coffee, even the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Everything now carried the weight of possibility, of danger, of betrayal. The ordinary had transformed into the extraordinary, forcing me to reassess not just my immediate surroundings, but the very people I thought I knew. Finally, before leaving the kitchen, I turned to Marlene. my voice steadier than I expected. "Thank you for noticing, for stopping me." Her smile was quiet, almost shy, but it held a kind of courage that words could never fully capture. "You saved more than just my morning. You saved my life." I picked up my briefcase, glancing one last time at the untouched cup of coffee. It sat there innocently, a vessel that could have ended everything in an instant. I walked toward the door, my mind racing with plans, strategies, and suspicions. The day ahead was no longer just about office meetings or paperwork. It was about survival, understanding, and confronting truths I had long ignored. Even as I stepped outside into the crisp morning air, the feeling of vulnerability lingered, mixed with a strange sense of clarity. I knew today would set the tone for the days to come. Decisions had to be made, alliances carefully observed, and trust redefined. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a spark of determination flickered. I was ready. The morning sun was streaming into the car as I drove to the office, but its warmth couldn't chase away the icy realization that had settled over me. Marlene's warning replayed in my mind in sharp, jagged fragments. "I think Claire put something in it, something that could hurt you." Even now, hours later, the memory of the coffee almost touching my lips sent a shiver down my spine. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles whitening, and took a deep breath, trying to push past the lingering panic. But fear wasn't the only thing coursing through me. Anger, suspicion, and an uneasy determination were rising too. I replayed the events in my head, line by line, gesture by gesture. Claire's polite smile in the kitchen suddenly seemed calculated rather than kind. Her offer to make my coffee, her gentle hum as she walked around the kitchen. These had all felt like everyday niceties before. But now they had the weight of intent. I realized I had been blind to subtle patterns that were hard to spot when you trust someone blindly. And that trust, so vital, so deeply ingrained, was now a dangerous liability. Pulling into the office parking lot, I could feel the tension in my shoulders and the tightness in my jaw. Normally, I would have felt calm entering the familiar building, greeting the receptionist, and casually chatting with coworkers on my way to my office. Today, every step felt heavy, every smile suspect. My mind wandered back to Claire. What had motivated her to attempt something so reckless? Money? Influence? Power over my decisions in the upcoming meeting? The more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't know the answer. And that uncertainty made her even more dangerous. As I walked past the glass doors into the building, I noticed small details that I had always overlooked. The way the janitor glanced at me, with polite curiosity, the subtle shift in the receptionist's posture, even the faint aroma of coffee from the break room. It all seemed heightened today, magnified by my vigilance. It was as if the entire office was suddenly alive with secret signals and hidden meanings, and I had become painfully attuned to every nuance. Once inside, I headed straight to my office, ignoring the usual pleasantries with coworkers. My desk felt like a small sanctuary in a storm, a place where I could think clearly. I sat down, and my gaze fell on the stack of papers waiting for me, the documents that would influence the upcoming budget meeting. I stared at them, tracing the outlines of charts and signatures with my eyes, feeling a sudden sense of urgency. These papers weren't just numbers, they were leverage, power, and opportunity. And now, I realized they might have been the very reason for Claire's morning deception. I called Marlene quietly into my office, closing the door behind her. She looked nervous, shifting from foot to foot, her hands clutching the cleaning cloth she always carried. "Tell me everything you saw last night," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, though the adrenaline was still thrumming through me. Marlene took a deep breath and began in a low, measured voice. "I was in the kitchen late, putting things away after you went to bed. I saw Claire leave a small packet by the coffee maker. I didn't touch it because I wasn't sure what it was, but I recognized the smell, faint, chemical, slightly bitter. It reminded me of something my sister experienced years ago when she was poisoned accidentally. My stomach dropped. My heart hammered in my chest as I tried to imagine the implications. Are you saying she intended to? I couldn't finish the sentence. The thought was too heavy to even voice. Marlene nodded slowly. I think she wanted you to drink it, yes. But I'm not certain how serious it was. It could have been meant to make you sick, or worse. I couldn't take the risk. That's why I spoke up. I leaned back in my chair, pressing my hands against my face. The reality of it was staggering. I had trusted Claire. I had welcomed her into my home, let her share in daily routines, even relied on her for small acts of kindness. And now I realized that trust might have been exploited. Betrayal in the family is never loud. It's subtle, quiet, and often invisible until it's almost too late. And in that quiet, I had nearly lost myself. Marlene's eyes were full of concern. You can't just ignore this, Rose. You need to be careful. Pay attention to her actions, to what she says. Look for patterns. Patterns. The word echoed in my mind as I began piecing together a timeline in my head. Claire's insistence on making my coffee every morning, her sudden interest in my morning routine, the way she subtly steered conversations toward the office meeting, asking about my preferences and decisions as if preparing for something larger. It all began to form a chilling picture. And yet, even as I traced the lines of logic, I struggled to reconcile the woman I knew, or thought I knew, with this potential manipulator. I spent the next hour meticulously reviewing the documents for the meeting, though my thoughts kept drifting back to Claire. Each signature, each allocation, each recommendation now carried a new layer of meaning. Could she have been trying to influence me into making decisions favorable to her interests? Every line seemed to whisper questions. Who benefits? Who loses? And most importantly, could this act of coffee sabotage have been a warning or a test? As I studied the paperwork, I noticed something subtle in the office environment. A coworker, Susan, usually chatty and lighthearted, had avoided my desk entirely. Her eyes flicked nervously in my direction when she thought I wasn't looking. I realized that the dynamics around me might be shifting, not just with Claire, but with others who could be aware of tensions or worse, participating silently in them. Every glance, every half-smile seemed loaded with unspoken meaning. Determined to understand more, I decided to review surveillance footage from our home security system. Normally, I'd considered it mundane, just a precaution for mail and packages. But now it seemed essential. Marlene had told me Claire had left something by the coffee maker. Watching the footage, I saw Claire move around the kitchen the night before, pausing suspiciously near the counter, her hand lingering over a small, unidentifiable object. She didn't seem rushed. Her movements were deliberate, calculated. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the timing was perfect. She could have expected me to drink the coffee first thing in the morning, oblivious to the danger. I sat back, trying to process what I had seen. My mind raced with questions. Was Claire desperate for control over the office meeting? Had she been planning this for days? Weeks? Was it purely opportunistic? Or was there a deeper resentment I had failed to notice? And most importantly, what did this mean for my relationship with my son, Mark, who trusted her implicitly? Mark walked into the office unexpectedly, a cheerful smile on his face that did nothing to ease my tension. "Morning, Mom. Ready for the big meeting?" he asked, carrying his coffee in a to-go cup. I glanced at him, my mind still clouded with the implications of what had happened. I forced a smile, careful not to betray my inner turmoil. "Yes, I think so," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Just reviewing some details." Mark frowned slightly, sensing something amiss. "Everything okay? You look different this morning." I hesitated, weighing my words carefully. I couldn't yet reveal the entire truth. Not without proof, but I needed him alert to the subtle dangers surrounding us. "I had a scare this morning," I said cautiously. "Nothing serious, but it reminded me that sometimes people aren't always what they seem." His eyebrows knit together, and he nodded slowly, not fully understanding, but trusting my judgment. It was enough for now. I knew I had to gather more evidence before confronting anyone directly. The rest of the morning was a delicate dance. I answered calls, read emails, and interacted with colleagues with a careful, measured demeanor. Every smile, every gesture, every casual comment from Claire felt loaded with possibility. I noticed the way she lingered near the coffee machine, pretending to clean, her eyes darting toward me occasionally. I realized she was confident, unaware, or pretending to be, that her actions had been discovered. To understand her motives more fully, I decided to trace back to her recent behaviors at home. I recalled small incidents, Claire insisting on helping me organize my paperwork, subtly questioning how I planned to vote in office matters, and even her frequent remarks about how she hoped Mark and I would trust her decisions. Each memory now carried a different weight, a new significance. The seemingly ordinary gestures were pieces of a carefully constructed puzzle, revealing someone strategic and cunning, someone who was not above bending or even endangering others to achieve her goals. I couldn't ignore the patterns any longer. Claire's actions were deliberate, not accidental. Her calm, measured politeness was a mask, a carefully crafted persona designed to deflect suspicion. The more I examined her behaviors, the more I realized how close I had come to being blindsided. Every detail I had overlooked, the small gifts, the subtle nudges, the insistence on controlling routines, was part of a broader picture, one I could not ignore. Marlene's quiet presence remained my anchor through this storm of realization. She helped me document every suspicious action, every nuance of behavior, every subtle remark. With her meticulous attention to detail, I began to see the emerging narrative, Claire's ambition, her desperation, and her willingness to manipulate circumstances to her advantage. It was terrifying, yet oddly empowering. Knowledge, after all, is the first step toward protection. By late morning, I had pieced together enough to understand the stakes. Claire had tried to influence me through subtle, potentially dangerous means, but she hadn't accounted for vigilance, for intuition, or for the quiet courage of someone like Marlene. I realized that uncovering motives wasn't just about observing actions. It was about reading the spaces between gestures, understanding silence, and interpreting the emotional undercurrents that others take for granted. Sitting back, I felt a strange mix of relief and determination. The danger had been real, but now I had clarity. I had unearthed hidden motives, and with that knowledge came a renewed sense of agency. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't naive. I was alert, aware, and ready to navigate the complex web of trust, betrayal, and power that had suddenly become my reality. The hum of fluorescent lights greeted me as I stepped into the office lobby, a stark contrast to the warm sunlight I had left behind at home. The moment I opened the door, the familiar smell of copier toner and faint brewed coffee enveloped me. But today, even the most ordinary details felt heightened, charged with subtle threats and hidden intentions. My hands tightened around my briefcase strap, each step echoing slightly on the polished floor as I made my way toward the main office floor. I was acutely aware of every eye that flicked toward me, every whispered conversation that seemed to pause when I entered the room. Claire was already there, her posture calm, shoulders squared, and smile carefully maintained. She was at her usual spot near the conference table, reviewing documents with a quiet intensity that only made her appear more composed, more confident than I had ever seen her. And yet, beneath that surface, I could sense something deliberate. It was in the way she tapped her pen against the folder, in the slight narrowing of her eyes as she glanced up at me, and the careful way she folded her hands when I approached. It wasn't just office efficiency, it was calculation. "Rose," she said, her tone perfectly neutral, masking any emotion that might betray her inner state. "Good to see you. I hope you're ready for the meeting. Everything's laid out for you." Her words, polite and measured, felt like a test, a challenge subtly wrapped in courtesy. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Thank you, Claire. I appreciate the preparation," I replied, my voice calm, but my mind racing. Every gesture she made now carried potential meaning. Every glance, every smile could be a clue or a trap. I noticed Susan hovering near the water cooler, avoiding direct eye contact, but clearly listening. Her slight shift when Claire spoke suggested she had some knowledge of the underlying tension, though whether it was innocent curiosity or silent complicity, I couldn't yet tell. Even co-workers who typically ignored office politics seemed subtly alert, adjusting their movements to the unfolding dynamic. I realized, with a mixture of unease and fascination, that the stakes of this meeting were no longer purely professional. They were personal, tangled with trust, betrayal, and hidden agendas. As I took my seat at the conference table, I spread out the documents before me. The budget proposals, staff allocations, and project recommendations that had once seemed straightforward now appeared as a delicate web of influence, opportunity, and power. Each line, each number carried potential consequences not only for the company but for the personal alliances forming and shifting around me. My pulse quickened. I had to be precise, measured, and alert. Every word I spoke could tip the balance of the day. Claire leaned forward slightly, flipping through her own stack of documents with calculated ease. I noticed a few areas in last quarter's budget that might need reconsideration, she said casually, her tone almost conversational. "I thought it might help if I highlighted them before the discussion begins." Her words, though seemingly innocuous, set off a chain of thoughts in my mind. Was this a genuine effort to assist, or a subtle attempt to frame the narrative, to guide my decisions in her favor? I had learned enough from Marlene's observations and my own vigilance to know that even kindness could mask intent. I met her gaze, maintaining a calm exterior while silently cataloging every inflection, every pause, every choice of phrase. The room filled gradually as more colleagues entered, each person adding a layer to the tense atmosphere. Tom, a usually jovial project manager, took his seat quietly, eyes flicking between Claire and me with something resembling caution. Jenna, known for her meticulous attention to detail, arranged her papers with exaggerated care, glancing up occasionally as if gauging the room's emotional temperature. It was as though the office had collectively sensed the undercurrent of tension, responding with subtle signals, small shifts, and unconscious gestures that spoke volumes if one knew how to read them. The meeting officially began with the usual formalities: greetings, agenda outlines, and brief remarks from upper management. But beneath the routine structure, a silent battle was underway. Every suggestion Claire made, every point she highlighted, seemed designed to frame her perspective as the rational, reasonable approach. And every instinct I had, honed by hours of vigilance and reflection, warned me that this was more than professional strategy. It was a subtle play for control, for influence over decisions I had the power to make. Midway through the discussion, Claire suggested reallocating a portion of the budget for a project that, on the surface, seemed low risk. Her tone was light, almost casual, but I noticed the glimmer of expectation in her eyes, the tiny smile she couldn't quite conceal. It could streamline operations, she said, and prevent potential bottlenecks later in the quarter. I took a moment before responding, choosing my words carefully. "I see your point, Claire," I said slowly, allowing the pause to emphasize thoughtfulness. However, reallocating funds at this stage might delay other essential projects. We need to consider long-term impacts as well as immediate benefits. The subtle tension in her posture was almost imperceptible, but I noticed it. Her confidence wavered for the briefest of moments, revealing the first crack in the carefully constructed mask she had worn all morning. I felt a small surge of satisfaction, not for dominance, but for clarity. Recognition of motive gave me power. Understanding intent allowed me to navigate the conversation without falling into traps. As the discussion continued, I began to observe the undercurrents in the room more acutely. Susan shifted slightly, subtly nodding when I countered Claire's suggestions, an unspoken acknowledgement that she recognized the tension and sided, at least momentarily, with rational oversight. Tom's eyes flicked toward the window repeatedly, as if seeking distraction from the mounting stress, while Jenna's meticulous notes betrayed an awareness of potential outcomes far beyond what she verbally expressed. Each person contributed unknowingly to a web of silent communication, a network of alliances, assumptions, and cautious calculations. Midway through a financial summary, a sudden miscommunication occurred. A printout containing project costs had been misplaced, and a junior assistant nervously handed me the wrong set of documents. Claire seized the opportunity subtly, suggesting we revisit the figures in a way that might cast certain allocations in her favor. My heart raced, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of navigating a minefield of subtle manipulation. I remained calm, scanning the papers, correcting the numbers with a steady hand, and addressing the room with quiet authority. The tension thickened, but my resolve strengthened. I was fully alert, fully present, fully aware of every motive at play. During a brief break, Claire approached me with a friendly tone, attempting casual conversation. "Rose, I hope we're okay after this morning," she said, her words seemingly innocent, yet carrying an undercurrent I couldn't ignore. "I know we all want the best outcome." I measured my response carefully. "We are," I said calmly, masking the storm of thoughts inside me. But this morning was a reminder that even well-meaning gestures can be misinterpreted, or worse. Her eyes flickered briefly, with a shadow of something I couldn't quite place, perhaps guilt, perhaps irritation, perhaps a fleeting realization that her plans had been uncovered. She smiled again, polite and controlled, and walked back toward her seat. The subtle power dynamic had shifted, even if only slightly, and I felt a cautious sense of validation. Awareness had become my ally. The final phase of the meeting involved the decision-making process, where each member's vote carried weight. Claire attempted a final push, highlighting the benefits of her proposed budget reallocations. I observed her closely, noting the micro-expressions, the slight hesitation in her gestures, the way she occasionally licked her lips in anticipation. Each detail was a clue, a reflection of hidden motives. I responded with measured, logical arguments, weighing benefits against risks, emphasizing long-term stability and fairness. The room grew quiet as the tension reached its peak. Each suggestion, each counterpoint, carried implications far beyond the numbers on paper. I could feel the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders, not just for the company, but for the moral and ethical landscape of the room. Claire's motives were no longer abstract. They were visible, tangible, and navigable. My focus sharpened, and I realized that the showdown wasn't just about the meeting. It was about awareness, observation, and the quiet assertion of integrity in the face of manipulation. By the end of the meeting, decisions had been made, allocations finalized, and votes cast. The room exhaled collectively, though subtle tension lingered in the air. Claire maintained her composure outwardly, but I could see the careful recalibration in her posture, the slight narrowing of her eyes as she observed me. I had survived the first round, navigated the subtle battlefield, and emerged with clarity intact. The showdown had tested both intellect and instinct, and I had passed. As I gathered my documents and prepared to leave, I realized something crucial. The office was not just a workspace. It was a stage where hidden motives played out with precision, subtlety, and quiet audacity. Today had been a confrontation, yes, but it had been one conducted with awareness, strategy, and the quiet power of observation. I felt a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and growing determination. Knowledge of motives had given me agency. I understood the game now, and I was prepared for whatever came next. Walking out of the conference room, I exchanged a brief glance with Marlene, who had quietly observed the unfolding drama. Her subtle nod of acknowledgement felt like a lifeline, a reminder that vigilance and courage, even in small, quiet forms, can shift outcomes dramatically. I stepped into the hallway with renewed purpose, the echoes of the meeting still lingering, but clarity and determination guiding my every move. The office had quieted, the tension from the meeting still lingering like an invisible fog. I had managed to navigate the subtle minefield of intentions, but the unease had not left me. Every step toward my car felt heavier, burdened by a need for clarity I couldn't shake. I knew the confrontation with Claire was inevitable. The realization that she had potentially endangered my life was a cold, jagged weight that pressed against my chest. I needed answers, and I needed them soon. Back at home, the house seemed quieter than usual. The late afternoon light slanted through the blinds, casting long, angular shadows across the living room. I called Marlene to my side and whispered, "I think it's time. We need to confront Claire, carefully but directly. It's the only way I can understand what happened." Marlene nodded, her expression a mix of concern and support. She had already proven her courage earlier, and I knew I could trust her to stand quietly beside me, observing and supporting without interference. Claire entered the living room moments later, carrying a stack of papers she claimed needed to be signed. She smiled, the same calm, polite smile, but this time I could feel the undercurrent of tension running beneath her composed exterior. "I thought I'd go over these with you," she said softly. "It'll only take a few minutes." I gestured for her to sit, keeping my tone neutral. "Claire, we need to talk. Not about the papers. About this morning." Her eyes flickered briefly, and I caught the faintest shadow of unease, or perhaps realization. She adjusted her posture, folding her hands on her lap, her polite composure still intact. "This morning," she asked innocently, though her voice carried the barest edge of hesitation. "Yes," I said, taking a deep breath. "The coffee. Marlene told me she noticed something unusual last night, that something may have been put in it intentionally." For a moment, she didn't speak. The silence was sharp, almost suffocating. I watched her hands twitch slightly as she adjusted the papers on her lap. My pulse quickened, not out of fear, but anticipation. I needed to see her reaction, to read the truth in her subtle movements, her expressions, and the pause in her breathing. I don't know what you mean," she finally said, voice steady but unusually quiet. Her eyes avoided mine for just a second too long. "I want the truth, Claire," I said firmly. "I'm not here to yell or accuse without reason, but I need to understand why this happened. I need to know what your intentions were." She shifted in her seat, a small sign of discomfort that betrayed the carefully constructed mask she wore. "Rose," she stopped abruptly, biting her lip. I leaned forward slightly, my eyes fixed on hers. The room seemed to shrink around us, the sunlight streaming and cutting harsh lines across her face, highlighting the tension etched in her features. Marlene, standing quietly behind me, gave me a subtle nod, a reminder to stay calm, to observe. I inhaled slowly, focusing on the words I would choose, aware that every syllable now carried weight. "I trusted you," I continued, my voice softer but no less firm. I welcomed you into my home, allowed you to be part of our routines. And now I'm faced with the possibility that you intentionally tried to harm me. Why, Claire? Her eyes flickered downward, the first honest glimpse of vulnerability or guilt appearing in the form of a brief, almost imperceptible tremor in her hands. It wasn't meant to go that far, she whispered, almost to herself. I didn't think. I only wanted— She paused again, struggling to find words, her voice faltering. I waited patiently, letting the tension stretch between us. Every pause, every hesitation was a revelation. Only wanted what, Claire? I pressed gently. You need to be clear. Only wanted what? Her gaze finally met mine, and I saw the flicker of desperation I had suspected all along. To influence your decision at the meeting, she admitted, her voice barely audible. I didn't want anyone to get hurt. I swear. I thought if you agreed with my suggestion, it would help Mark and me. I didn't think about the risk. The confession hit me like a wave, relief mingled with shock and lingering anger. She had intended to manipulate, yes, but not to harm. And yet, the fact that she had even considered it was almost unbearable. I felt a mix of disbelief and the cold clarity that comes with seeing someone's true motives laid bare. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of the revelation settle. Claire, I said quietly, you gambled with my life over office decisions. Over influence. That's not just a mistake. That's a breach of trust so deep it will take years to repair. If it ever can be repaired. She swallowed hard, tears forming in the corners of her eyes. I know. I didn't mean for it to happen this way. I thought I was helping, but I see now I was wrong. So wrong. I studied her carefully, the lines of fear and guilt etched on her face. My mind oscillated between anger and the desire for understanding. I could feel my pulse steadying as clarity replaced the initial shock. I wasn't powerless anymore. I had the evidence, I had Marlene's account, and I had my own awareness. Let me be clear, I said, choosing each word deliberately. Manipulation, deception, threats, intentional or not, cannot be part of this household or our family. I need assurance that this will never happen again, Claire. Ever. And I need you to understand the gravity of what could have occurred this morning. Her hands clasped together tightly, and she nodded repeatedly. I understand, Rose. I swear I understand. I never wanted to hurt you. I was foolish. I see it now. Even as she spoke, I could feel the layers of our relationship unraveling. The warmth of trust one had felt toward her was replaced by a careful, measured vigilance. This confrontation was necessary, not just for clarity, but for my own safety and the stability of our family. Marlene stepped closer, her voice gentle but firm. Claire, actions have consequences. Even if intent was different, this could have ended badly. You need to acknowledge that fully. Claire's eyes welled with tears. I do. I understand. I am sorry. Her voice cracked slightly, and for the first time, I believed her remorse was genuine. The subtle tension in the room shifted slightly, replaced by the fragile possibility of reconciliation or at least acknowledgement of wrongdoing. I leaned forward, my own hands resting on the table. Acknowledgement is a start, Claire, but it's not enough. You need to demonstrate through actions, not just words, that trust can be rebuilt. That this kind of manipulation has no place here. Her nod was slow, deliberate. I'll do whatever it takes, she whispered. I will. The room was silent for a moment, filled only with the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of traffic outside. I felt a strange sense of release, tense, cautious, but undeniable. The confrontation had revealed motives, intentions, and truths I had long suspected but had never fully confronted. And now, with those truths laid bare, I had the foundation to navigate the relationship carefully with awareness and vigilance. I decided to take a step further, asking a question that had been pressing at the edge of my mind. Claire, can you tell me exactly what you intended to put in the coffee? What did you think it would do? She flinched at the directness, then spoke, voice low and hesitant. A mild sedative, just enough to make you feel drowsy during the meeting. I didn't want to harm you, only to influence the discussion. I realize now how reckless and selfish that was. The admission was chilling, yet also clarifying. It reinforced the reality that Claire's ambition and desperation had driven her to a dangerous action, but it had not been malicious in intent. I felt a mixture of fear, relief, and determination coalescing within me. The threat had been real, but the understanding of her motives allowed me to navigate the aftermath strategically. I leaned back, studying her for a long moment. This isn't just about today, Claire. It's about patterns of behavior. If this was an isolated incident, it's still serious. But if it reflects a larger tendency to manipulate or control, then we need to address that too. Her gaze dropped again, a shadow of shame crossing her features. I see that now. I've been blind to how my actions affect others. I never considered the consequences fully. I was focused only on what I wanted, and I realized that's no excuse. Marlene gave me a subtle nod from across the room. Her quiet presence had been invaluable throughout this confrontation. She had witnessed the subtle exchanges, the hesitation, and the unspoken truths. I knew her perspective would remain a silent anchor, a reminder that courage and vigilance often exist in quiet, understated ways. By the time the conversation ended, the room felt charged, yet lighter. The confrontation had drawn lines, exposed motives, and clarified intentions. I had seen the hidden layers of Claire's behavior, understood the risks, and had her acknowledgement of wrongdoing. It was a turning point, a moment where transparency replaced ambiguity and potential chaos was tempered by clarity. I felt exhausted, yet oddly empowered. This confrontation, while tense and emotionally taxing, had allowed me to reclaim a sense of control. I had faced a threat directly, uncovered hidden motives, and ensured that the truth was no longer concealed behind politeness or deception. The revelation had brought fear, anger, and grief, but it had also brought clarity, understanding, and the foundation for cautious rebuilding. The confrontation with Claire had left the air in our home dense, thick with emotion, and the echoes of truths laid bare. For a long moment after she left the living room, I sat silently in my chair, my hands resting lightly on the table, heart still pounding. The sunlight that streamed through the blinds illuminated the dust particles drifting lazily in the room, and yet every tiny mote's movement seemed magnified under the weight of what had just transpired. I felt alive, aware, but also drained, like I had survived a storm that could have broken me had I been any less vigilant. Marlene's quiet presence beside me was comforting, her calm steadiness acting as a balm to my frayed nerves. "You handled that well," she whispered softly. "You didn't lash out. You observed, questioned, and got the truth. That takes courage." I nodded, though the relief I felt was tempered by the sobering reality of the situation. Courage, I realized, was only part of survival. Understanding motives, anticipating danger, and maintaining composure were equally critical. I rose and walked slowly to the window, staring out at the quiet suburban street where children played and neighbors exchanged greetings. On the surface, everything seemed ordinary, peaceful, but beneath that veneer, I knew that subtle dangers and hidden motives could lurk anywhere, even within the people you trust most. Claire's actions had reminded me of that undeniable truth, and yet, strangely, the awareness gave me a sense of power rather than fear. I had survived, not by chance, but by vigilance and presence of mind. The thought of justice began to settle in my mind, a cold, deliberate fire. I couldn't simply forgive or forget without measures in place to prevent recurrence. Survival alone wasn't enough. There had to be accountability. I considered my options carefully. Legal action seemed extreme, but clear boundaries were necessary. Trust would need to be rebuilt cautiously, with oversight and safeguards. And most importantly, Mark, my son, needed to be aware fully without chaos or accusation disrupting family stability. I called Mark into the study, his face lighting up briefly as he stepped in, unaware of the gravity of what I intended to discuss. "Mark," I began carefully, my voice firm yet measured, "there's something serious we need to talk about. It concerns Claire." He frowned slightly, sensing the unusual tone in my voice. "Mom, is everything okay?" I need to explain something fully, without judgment, without interruption. It's important you understand what happened this morning and why it matters. I paused, allowing the words to settle. Claire attempted to manipulate me in a way that could have harmed me. Marlene noticed something unusual last night, and it prevented what could have been dangerous consequences. Mark's eyes widened, his usual calm demeanor faltering. "Wait, are you saying she tried to—" He stopped abruptly, unable to finish the sentence. "Yes," I said, firmly meeting his gaze. "She did not intend to cause serious harm, according to her admission, but the risk was real. We need to recognize that, understand it, and set boundaries going forward." Mark ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of disbelief and frustration. "I can't believe it. Claire? She's family. How could she even think of doing something like that?" "I don't know," I admitted, my voice calm but heavy with honesty. "But we have to deal with it. Not with anger alone, but with clarity, accountability, and vigilance. I've confronted her, and she acknowledged her actions. But that acknowledgement is only the beginning. We spent the next hour discussing measures for accountability, boundaries, and oversight. We decided on clear steps, documenting routines, sharing decision-making processes, and ensuring Marlene remained a vigilant observer, not as a spy, but as an ally capable of noticing subtleties we might overlook. The discussion was tense, honest, and emotionally taxing, but necessary. In those conversations, I realized that justice was not just punitive, it was protective, structured, and preventative. Later that afternoon, I sat alone in the garden, the scent of blooming roses mingling with the crisp autumn air. My mind replayed the morning's events, the confrontation, and Mark's reactions. I thought about Claire, not just as a threat or a wrongdoer, but as a flawed human being. She had ambition, fear, and desperation, all interwoven in ways that nearly endangered me. Understanding her motives did not absolve her actions, but it gave me insight into human complexity, a reminder that people often act out of layers of fear, desire, and perceived necessity. Marlene joined me quietly, settling onto the garden bench beside me with her usual soft grace. "You've been thinking a lot," she said, her voice gentle but perceptive. "It's a lot to process. Rose." I admitted, but I also feel clearer, stronger. I survived, and now I understand more, not just about Claire, but about myself, about the importance of vigilance, boundaries, and trust built carefully, not blindly. She nodded knowingly. Survival isn't just physical. It's emotional, mental, and relational. You've handled all of that with awareness. That's why you're still standing strong. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the garden, and I found myself reflecting deeply. Life, I realized, is often a balance between trust and caution, hope and vigilance, love and prudence. I thought about the subtle ways betrayal can manifest, not always through dramatic acts, but through quiet manipulations, intentions cloaked in politeness, and everyday actions that mask danger. Understanding this, I felt, was part of survival itself. The next few days were structured, deliberate. I observed interactions carefully, noting Claire's behaviors and subtle cues. She maintained politeness and composure, yet I noticed occasional flickers of anxiety in her eyes when certain topics arose. It wasn't malicious intent this time. It was recognition, understanding that the veil of invisibility she relied upon had been lifted. The knowledge that I was vigilant altered the dynamics between us, establishing boundaries without unnecessary confrontation. At the office, I applied the lessons learned from the confrontation. Every meeting, every discussion was approached with heightened awareness. I observed colleagues' intentions with care, noting subtleties that once would have gone unnoticed. Decisions were deliberate, carefully measured, and informed by both professional understanding and emotional intelligence. The sense of control, previously absent, returned gradually, bolstered by the hard-earned knowledge of motives and the courage to act. Justice, I realized, came in multiple forms. There was accountability within the family, boundaries, and understanding that discouraged repetition. There was vigilance in the workplace, observation, awareness, and careful documentation. And there was self-justice, the reclamation of confidence, power, and personal agency. I felt an emerging clarity, a renewed sense of self. I wasn't just surviving. I was asserting my right to live safely with awareness and dignity intact. One evening, after a long day of meticulous observation and reflection, I sat alone in the kitchen, sipping tea rather than coffee. The warmth seeped into my hands, and I allowed myself a moment of stillness. I thought about the events that had unfolded, the near betrayal, Marlene's vigilance, Claire's motives, and the confrontation that had forced truth into the open. It had been a storm, unpredictable and intense, but it had also been illuminating. I understood more about human nature, about the subtleties of trust and deception, and about the resilience required to navigate such complexities. Mark joined me quietly, sensing the reflective atmosphere. He poured himself a cup of tea and sat across from me. "Mom," he began softly, "I've been thinking about everything too, about Claire, about this morning, and about you. You handled it better than I could have imagined. Calm, composed, and direct. You didn't let anger dictate your actions." I smiled faintly, appreciating the acknowledgement. It wasn't easy, I admitted, but survival isn't just about reacting. It's about understanding, observing, and acting with awareness. That's how we prevent harm, not just respond to it. He nodded, thoughtful. "I see that now, and I understand why boundaries are so important. I'll support you, and I'll make sure Claire understands the seriousness of her actions." The conversation lingered in my mind long after he left the kitchen. Reflection, I realized, was as critical as confrontation. It allowed lessons to solidify, awareness to deepen, and strategies to form for the future. Life wasn't only about surviving immediate danger. It was about ensuring safety, understanding motives, and fostering a network of vigilance, support, and integrity. In the following weeks, routines were adjusted. Claire's role in the household became more structured, defined by oversight and accountability rather than unchecked influence. Marlene remained a quiet observer, her presence a subtle but critical reassurance. And I moved through each day with heightened awareness, balancing vigilance with trust carefully, like walking along a narrow bridge between past vulnerabilities and future security. Even simple acts, sipping tea, checking emails, interacting with colleagues, were infused with awareness. I found a strange sense of empowerment in that vigilance. Survival had taught me that life is unpredictable, that motives can be hidden in polite gestures, and that self-preservation requires both observation and courage. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was actively shaping my environment to protect myself and those I cared about. On a quiet evening, as the sun set in brilliant oranges and reds, I walked into the garden, inhaling the crisp air and observing the roses that bloomed stubbornly against the approaching autumn chill. Each flower, resilient in its fragile beauty, reminded me of myself. I had survived, understood, confronted, and reflected. I had navigated betrayal, uncovered motives, and asserted justice without losing composure. Life, with all its hidden dangers and quiet manipulations, had been met head-on, and I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more vigilant. The weight of fear that had once pressed so heavily against my chest had been replaced by clarity and cautious confidence. The near tragedy with the coffee had become a lesson in awareness, boundaries, and resilience. Claire's motives, now fully understood, were a reminder of human complexity, the blend of ambition, desperation, and flawed judgment that can lead even loved ones astray. And reflection had provided the most important gift of all, the understanding that survival, justice, and wisdom are intertwined, each reinforcing the other. I closed my eyes, feeling the cool breeze on my face, and whispered quietly to myself, I survived. I am safe. I am aware. And I will never let my guard down again, not blindly, not for anyone. It was a simple affirmation, but it carried a profound weight. The storm had passed, but the lessons endured, etched deeply into my mind, my instincts, and my heart. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself moving through life with a new rhythm, one forged in vigilance, clarity, and careful reflection. The near tragedy that had started with a cup of coffee, an act that could have ended everything, had instead become the catalyst for transformation. I understood more than ever that survival was not a passive state. It was active, demanding constant attention to motives, subtle signs, and the layers of human behavior that often remain hidden beneath politeness or familiarity. I realized that true security, whether in family or in the workplace, required both observation and courage. I had survived because I had trusted my instincts, because I had questioned, confronted, and demanded truth. But survival alone was not enough. Justice and understanding were equally essential. I had demanded accountability from Claire, not as punishment, but as a boundary, an assertion that manipulation, deception, and carelessness with another's safety would never be tolerated, no matter how disguised in ambition or fear. Her acknowledgement of wrongdoing, combined with structured measures to prevent future mistakes, created a framework where trust could slowly, cautiously be rebuilt. Yet it was reflection that proved the most powerful of all. In the quiet moments, sipping tea in the fading sunlight, walking through the garden where the roses bloomed stubbornly against the chill, I contemplated the lessons etched into every interaction, every pause, every glance that had revealed hidden intentions. I recognized that human motives are rarely simple, that even those closest to us can act in ways we never anticipate, and that understanding these motives is not only a matter of self-protection, but of wisdom. I also understood the weight of responsibility I carried, not just for myself, but for Mark, for Marlene, and for the delicate ecosystem of trust within our family and community. Survival had taught me to be aware. Justice had taught me to be deliberate. Reflection had taught me to be wise. I felt a profound sense of resilience, not born of recklessness, but of awareness and deliberate action. The morning that had threatened to shatter my world had instead become a defining moment, a pivot from vulnerability to empowerment. I had navigated fear, deception, and hidden agendas, and emerged not just intact, but strengthened. I realized that life's dangers, both subtle and overt, were part of the human experience, but so too were courage, insight, and the capacity for measured action. As I looked out at the fading light, I whispered quietly to myself, a mantra as much as a promise. I will never allow complacency to rule my life. I will observe, I will question, and I will act with awareness. I will protect myself, and I will honor the trust that others place in me. And above all, I will remember that even in moments of betrayal and danger, clarity, courage, and reflection can transform fear into power and uncertainty into a roadmap for survival and peace.